Hello, my name is Emily Arkell and I study at Queen's University.
My name is Berg Ellemers, and I'm studying at McMaster University.
My name is Ronan Garrison, and I'm studying at McMaster University.
My name is Daniel Jalali, and I'm studying at Western University. And together we are Core Coffee. Today, we will be presenting our solution to supply chain vulnerability in an industry that's very important to many Canadians, coffee. Core Coffee presents an opportunity to deglobalize coffee production by leveraging technological advancements in agriculture and clean energy, presenting end consumers with an ethically sourced product while minimizing climate impact. So to take a look at the problem that motivated us to create this model, we know that caffeine is the world's most used psychoactive drug, with over 80% of North Americans consuming on a regular basis. This amounts to 490 million cups a day, or $52 billion in annual revenue. This number is only expected to increase, growing at a rate of 5% through 2025. So obviously this is a massive amount of coffee, but where is it all coming from? So unfortunately for coffee lovers, the coffee plant is extremely picky and can only be grown in very specific temperature and humidity conditions. So this narrows the farmable area down to a thin strip around the equator, known as the coffee belt. So over 3/4 of the world's coffee production is actually localized in just 5 countries: Colombia, Brazil, Ethiopia, Indonesia, and Vietnam. As you can imagine, a global supply chain with a highly concentrated supply center is massively vulnerable to climate change shocks. We've seen evidence of these vulnerabilities in the world price of raw coffee. So if we see here in 1997, we see the price go from under $1 to over $3 in less than a year. And this was due to a year of frost in just one of the major producing countries, Brazil. We see a similar trend occur again in 2011 due to unpredictable rain in Colombia. As climate change progresses, we can only expect unpredictable weather events to increase in prevalence.
So as Dan mentioned, coffee is grown internationally, but how does it really get from the bean to our bellies? So coffee is grown for about 6 to 11 months, depending how long the rain season lasts for. Once the coffee cherries are ripe, they're transported by truck to a processing plant, which processes those raw cherries. The cherries are then transported once again to a roaster, who roasts the beans and then turns those green cherries into the brown aromatic beans that we're all used to seeing. The coffee beans are then transported once again, either by air or ship, to the consumer. Throughout this process, the average coffee bean will travel a distance roughly equivalent to 8,000 kilometers. So as you can imagine, this creates a huge carbon footprint. The carbon footprint for 1 kilogram of coffee alone is equivalent to roughly 15 kilograms of CO2. So with such an intricate supply chain, there are a lot of vulnerabilities that arise at the different stages of production. Rising temperatures is one of the greatest risks to the coffee industry. For example, since the 70s, temperatures in Brazilian coffee growing municipalities have been increasing by roughly 0.25 degrees per decade. In a study done by Mesoamerican coffee producing regions, it was concluded that by 2050, these changes in temperature will decrease the area suitable for coffee production by roughly 40%. Another big risk to the industry is less rainfall. Low levels of rainfall during the growing seasons have been shown to decrease crop yields in multiple studies. Trade regulations also pose a big risk to the coffee industry. Since it's growing internationally, as more countries start to adopt carbon taxes and other regulations based on the environment, this can pose a risk to the price of coffee, increasing them, and also destabilize the supply.
So how exactly does this business model that we're presenting work? So here we have an example that we thought through using an underground abandoned mine, which are prevalent in Ontario. So as you can see, solar power generates the electricity which is required to grow the crops through the humidity controllers and the lights and others. And once the crop is ready for harvesting, it's harvested and brought above ground where it is distributed to our customers. So this graphic here just gives a general overview of how the whole process works. Now, how do we get this system output and what do we have to put into it? So throughout the harvest period, we calculated that we need roughly 438 megawatt hours of energy, which will be provided through solar. And this will bring about a £30,000 yield of coffee. Now, after each harvest, we're able to recycle the crops because you don't need new crops to grow your new yield. And we're able to do this once every 6 months, which means that if we can recycle this process, we can do this whole thing twice a year and get 2 harvests per year, which is great because right now in traditional farming, there's typically only 1 harvest per year. What are the benefits of this model compared to traditional coffee farming? So first off, we have a deglobalized production, and this increases the resilience of the supply chain because it won't become vulnerable to those geographic factors that were mentioned earlier. Secondly, we'll have resilient growing conditions, which will increase the yield that we see. Now, this is because underground, we're shielded from those inclement weather events that Dan mentioned earlier affected the price of coffee. We'll be able to have a safe environment for our coffee to grow, which will generate high yields. And finally, through using renewable power in this business model and by cutting down on the long distances traveled for each bean of coffee, we're able to see a net decrease in emissions. So let's jump into the environmental impact a bit more. As I mentioned in the previous slide, we saw a net decrease in emissions. And through our calculations with this model, we find that there will be roughly 50% less greenhouse emissions through this model versus traditional farming. Secondly, we'll have 90% less water usage. And this is because we're able to much more accurately control the amount of water that goes into the crop using the advanced methods of hydroponics. Finally, because we're not exposed to the outdoor environment, we do not need to use pesticides, which means that there will be no interaction with other variables in the environment. And also there'll be no chemical runoff into the environment because our crops won't need that.
So the business model that we are proposing stands to improve the coffee drinking experience through 4 key pillars. Now, as Ronan mentioned, the use of clean energy and reduced transportation emissions makes core coffee a very sustainable product. Core coffee is ethically produced by ensuring fair wages and good working conditions. And a customer purchasing core coffee can take pride in supporting a local business. Now, one thing that the pandemic has taught us is the importance of supporting local. And we saw communities rally to keep their local businesses afloat. On top of supporting a sustainable, ethical, and local brand, customers will enjoy our high quality coffee. Now, based on market research, the 19 to 34-year-old demographic consumes the most coffee. The product will appeal most to socially conscious consumers who value ethically and locally sourced products. Studies have proven that consumers are willing to pay more for ethically and environmentally conscious products. One particular study found that 73% of millennials are willing to pay more for a sustainable product. And this shows that the demand for ethically and sustainably produced products does exist. Our initial product offering will be 1-pound bags of premium roasted coffee beans. The beans are packaged in biodegradable materials, and look how fabulous they look. So core coffee will be priced at $25 per pound, and this puts us in the upper middle price range for ethically sourced premium coffee, which can sell anywhere from $18 at the ethical bean price to $38 at the Jamaica Blue price. Given the novelty of our product, our initial efforts will be focused on developing the brand and educating the consumer to build up the product segment. The initial strategy will rely heavily on social media marketing, where we'll develop our presence through partnerships with environmental organizations and socially conscious influencers. All content will lead to our landing page, where sales and payments are processed through Shopify.
So let's take a dive into the initial costs for this business model. So as we mentioned before, this will be powered using solar energy, which we costed out to be just under $2 million. The mine that I mentioned before, which are prevalent in Ontario, we've estimated to be about $200,000. And the remaining equipment would be about $300,000. This includes lighting fixtures, computers, growing racks, and others. So this yields a total initial cost of just over $2 million. And how does this cost get distributed throughout our 4-year cash flow forecast that we have here? So we have a conservative revenue model here with cost of goods sold and operating expenses following along in a similar trend. These yield these profits and earnings, which show a final 4th year positive cash balance. So what's great about this business model is that in year 4, we'll see a positive cash balance having paid off the initial costs. And also what's important to note is that there was a positive profit made in each year before.
So given the fact that we have quite a unique business model, especially for agriculture, there are a few key partnerships that we're hoping to leverage here. The first being coffee farmers. So coffee plants take roughly 5 years to mature. As a result, our model requires a partnership with an established coffee farmer to provide that initial transplant. This can be done through a compensation with revenue or provision of technicals. Our team is also hoping to partner with some of Canada's top research institutions that are world leaders in agriculture research. This will help us further increase our yields and stay ahead of the curve in terms of technological advancements. Finally, our team will seek funding from OMAFRA, the Ontario Ministry of Agriculture, Food and Rural Affairs, which dedicates grants specifically to greenhouse crops and provides grants for agriculture advancements. The core coffee team will be focused on crop production and plant development in the first 5 years. Packaging, distribution, and inventory management will be provided by TLS, a Canadian white label provider.
So in terms of scaling this model, in the short term, we envision this through 3 main mechanisms. The first being expanding to different geographies. So there's nothing unique about Ontario that permits this model. So we plan to expand across North America within the first 5 years. We also would like to scale through crop diversification, primarily in the short term through other high value crops, potentially marijuana and spices. And finally, we are planning to expand production as we generate cash flow to achieve economies of scale. Now, while this model has some unique benefits, it also has some unique risks, and these are primarily derived from the use of solar power. So solar is vulnerable to the weather, and to get around this, we have planned for the production of a backup storage facility as well as grid connection, which is already reflected in our financial model. Finally, we're also exposed to variable pricing in the coffee industry. So while this is a benefit if coffee prices go up, if coffee prices are to drop, our competitors will be able to compete on price. However, we've mitigated for this risk by targeting the premium segment of the market, which is less exposed to price fluctuations. Thanks for listening. We'd like you to join us in re-energizing the coffee industry.